So today I want to talk about something that most people are completely missing about this war. Everyone is watching the missiles. Everyone is watching the strikes. Everyone is watching the diplomatic statements and the military updates, but almost nobody is asking the question that actually matters most to ordinary people around the world. What is this war doing to the global economy? What does it mean for your job, your food, your energy bills, your savings, your future? And the answer, when you look at it carefully, is that this war is not just a military conflict between America, Israel, and Iran. It is the trigger for the most significant global economic reorientation in decades. And depending on where you live, depending on which side of this reorientation your country falls on, your life is about to change in ways that most people have not even begun to prepare for. So today I want to walk you through exactly what this war is doing to the global economy. Country by country, region by region, winner by winner, and loser by loser. So let us begin. Part 1, the new reality. Cheap energy is gone. So the first thing you need to understand, the foundation of everything else I'm going to tell you today, is this. The entire global economy for the past 40 to 50 years has been built on one single assumption, that cheap energy would always be available, always flowing, always accessible to every nation that needed it. This war is destroying that assumption permanently. And the question is no longer whether this will affect the global economy. The question is which nations will be most devastated by it, and which nations will find a way to survive and even thrive in this new reality. And the answer to that question depends entirely on one thing. How dependent is your country on cheap imported energy? The more dependent, the more devastated. The less dependent, the better positioned. Let me walk you through every major economy in the world with that framework in mind. Part 2, Southeast Asia, already running out of fuel right now. So let us start with Southeast Asia, because Southeast Asia is not waiting for the economic impact of this war to arrive. It is already here, right now, today. Thailand and Vietnam are already running out of fuel. You go to the gas station in Bangkok or Ho Chi Minh City right now, and there is simply no fuel available for your motorbike. No fuel. People are being forced to work from home, not because they chose to, but because they literally cannot fuel their vehicles to get to work. There is jet fuel rationing, flights are being canceled, entire industries that depend on energy, manufacturing, transportation, agriculture are grinding to a halt. And this is just the beginning. Think about what Southeast Asia actually looks like economically. These are nations, Thailand, Vietnam, Philippines, Indonesia, Malaysia, that have built their entire economic models around manufacturing and exporting goods to the rest of the world. Their factories run on energy. Their supply chains run on energy. Their transport networks run on energy. And now that energy is disappearing. The question is not whether Southeast Asia will be impacted by this war. Every nation on earth will be impacted. The question is, who will be most resilient? Who will be most willing to innovate and adapt to this new reality? Because we are not talking about a short-term disruption. We are talking about a long-term fundamental change to the global economy. Part 3, China, the most vulnerable economy in the world long-term. And now let us talk about China, because China is the most important economic story of this war. And it is not the story most people expect. On the surface, China looks powerful. It has the world's second largest economy. Its military is growing rapidly. Its global influence is expanding. But underneath that surface, China is facing an economic vulnerability from this war that could be more damaging than anything it has faced in decades. China imports approximately 40% of its total energy needs from the GCC. 40%. That is a massive exposure to exactly the supply chain that this war is destroying. And China's entire economic model, the model that made it wealthy over the past 30 to 40 years, is built on importing cheap energy and exporting manufactured goods. Cheap energy in, manufactured goods out. That is the entire Chinese economic model. And this war is destroying that model. Now, China knew this model could not last forever. For the past 20 years, China has been trying to transition, trying to move toward a consumer-based economy where Chinese citizens buy more goods and services domestically. and toward an innovation-based economy built on technology and artificial intelligence. But here's the problem. That transition has not worked. Chinese consumers are refusing to spend money. They're saving instead. Chinese household savings are running at approximately 4%, meaning Chinese families are holding on to their money rather than spending it into the economy. And the reason is very simple. Chinese people are not optimistic about their economic future. They see what is happening. They see the uncertainty, and they are protecting themselves. And the AI transition has its own fatal problem. Artificial intelligence, the technology China is betting its economic future on, is itself dependent on cheap energy. Training AI models, running AI systems, powering the data centers that AI requires, all of it consumes enormous amounts of energy. The very thing that is disappearing. So China finds itself in an extremely difficult position. Its old economic model is being destroyed by the energy crisis. Its new economic model is not working because consumers are not spending. And its technological bet on AI is itself vulnerable to the same energy crisis that is destroying everything else. China is not going to collapse immediately. It still has access to some Iranian oil. It still has strategic reserves. It can weather this crisis in the short term. But in the long term, China is the economy least prepared to adapt to a world of expensive energy. Its entire economic DNA is built around cheap energy, and cheap energy is gone. Part 4, America. Best position, but not without risk. And now let us talk about America. Because America's situation in this global economic reorientation is very different from almost every other major economy. The Western Hemisphere, America, Canada, Mexico, Latin America is extraordinarily wealthy in natural resources. America has oil, it has gas, it has coal, it has agricultural land, it has fresh water, it has timber, it has minerals. Everything in the economy needs to function. America has within its own hemisphere. The Western Hemisphere is essentially self-sufficient. This is a massive advantage in a world where global supply chains are breaking down and nations are being forced to rely on their own resources. America does not have to import its energy through the Strait of Hormuz. It does not have to depend on the GCC for its economic survival. Regardless of what happens in this war, America will come out doing pretty well, not because of its military power, but because of the sheer wealth and abundance of its own hemisphere, and because of the energy and creativity of the American people. But, and this is important, America is not without risk. America is sitting on $39 trillion in debt. $39 trillion. And the mechanism that allows America to sustain that debt, the petrodollar, is under threat. Remember what the petrodollar is? The GCC sells its oil in US dollars. Every nation that needs Gulf energy has to hold US dollars to buy it. That creates permanent global demand for US dollars. And the GCC recycles its dollar earnings back into American financial markets. This recycling mechanism is what allows America to borrow $39 trillion and keep functioning. The American economy is essentially a Ponzi scheme. It relies on foreign nations continuously buying US dollars and US debt to keep functioning. And if this war destroys the GCC, if the GCC falls under Iranian influence and abandons the petrodollar, America loses the financial mechanism that keeps its entire economic system alive. That is a serious risk, but it is a risk, not a certainty. And America's resource wealth gives it options that most other nations simply do not have. Part 5, Africa, the forgotten victim. And now I want to talk about a region that most geopolitical coverage of this war completely ignores. Africa. Africa is already the most economically vulnerable continent on Earth. Many African nations depend on food and energy imports to sustain their populations. Those imports come through global supply chains, the same global supply chains that this war is destroying. And the worst case scenario for Africa, the scenario that serious economists and food security experts are already warning about, is famine. Real famine. Not food price increases, not food shortages, famine. Because when global food supply chains break down, when fertilizer becomes unaffordable, when diesel prices make transporting food prohibitively expensive, the nations that suffer most are the ones with the least economic cushion to absorb those shocks. And Africa has the least cushion of any region on Earth. The bombs are falling on Iran, but the hunger could arrive in Africa. And that is something the entire world should be concerned about. Part 6, India and Pakistan, caught in the middle. And let us look at two more nations being significantly impacted: India and Pakistan. India imports approximately 60% of its oil from the GCC. 60%. That is an enormous exposure to the supply disruption this war is causing. And here is what makes India's situation particularly interesting. For the past several years, India has been positioning itself as the world's next great economic power. The nation with the fastest growing large economy on earth. The country that global businesses are looking to as an alternative manufacturing base. A place to build supply chains without depending entirely on China. That positioning was working. India's economy was growing. Foreign investment was flowing in. But now, with 60% of its energy coming from the GCC, India faces the same energy crisis that is threatening every other Asian economy. The very moment India was ready to step into a larger role in the global economy, the energy that powers that ambition is disappearing. India's economic potential is not destroyed by this, but it is significantly complicated. And how India navigates this energy challenge will determine whether it fulfills its enormous economic potential or whether this war delays that ambition by a decade. Pakistan is in an even more difficult position. Pakistan imports the majority of its oil from the GCC, and Pakistan's economy, already under severe stress before this war, is now facing energy shortages on top of its existing economic problems. For ordinary Pakistani families, the economic impact of this war is arriving at the worst possible time. Part 7, the Great Global Reorientation. So now let us zoom out and look at the biggest picture of all. Because what this war is doing to the global economy goes even deeper than fuel shortages and rising prices. It is triggering the most fundamental reorientation of the global economic order in decades. For the past 40 to 50 years, the global economy has been built on a very simple arrangement. The West consumes, the East produces. Western nations, America, Europe, Australia, import cheap manufactured goods from Asian nations, and Asian nations, China, Japan, South Korea, Vietnam, import cheap energy from the Gulf to power their factories. This arrangement worked beautifully as long as two things remain true: cheap energy from the Gulf and reliable global supply chains connecting East and West. This war is destroying both of those things simultaneously. And here is the crucial insight that most people are completely missing. It is not just the West that is locked into this arrangement. The East is locked into it too. Asian nations have built their entire economic identities around producing and exporting. Their factories, their infrastructure, their workforce training, their entire economic DNA, built around production and export. And now the cheap energy that powers that production is disappearing. And the global trade routes that carry those exports to Western consumers are being disrupted. This is a massive reorientation for everybody, not just for the West, not just for Asia, for everybody. The nations that survive this reorientation, the nations that thrive in the new economic order emerging from this war, will be the ones that adapt fastest, the ones that find new energy sources, build new supply chains, develop new economic models that do not depend on cheap Gulf energy. The nations that fail to adapt, the nations that keep waiting for cheap energy to come back, that keep hoping the old economic order will somehow be restored, those nations will fall behind in ways that will take generations to recover from. Part 8, the GCC, the biggest loser of all. And I want to end with the most surprising economic story of this entire war. The biggest economic loser. You might expect me to say Iran. Iran is being devastated militarily. Its infrastructure is being destroyed. Its economy is collapsing. Surely Iran is the biggest economic loser, but actually no. The biggest economic loser of this war is the GCC, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Qatar, Kuwait, Bahrain. These are the nations that will suffer most economically from this war, regardless of how it ends. And here is why. The GCC nations, Dubai, Riyadh, Doha, built themselves on a mirage. Think about what the GCC actually is geographically. It is a desert, a vast, hot, waterless desert with almost no agriculture, almost no fresh water, and almost no capacity to sustain a large population on its own. Under normal circumstances, this desert could support a small population living very simply. That is it. But then came the petrodollar, and American military protection. And suddenly these desert nations had access to almost unlimited financial resources. They could build desalination plants to create fresh water from the sea. They could build air-conditioned cities in the middle of the desert. They could import millions of workers from South Asia and Southeast Asia. They could build airports and shopping malls and financial centers. They could create the appearance, the very convincing appearance of modern, prosperous, cosmopolitan nations. Dubai became known as the future New York, the financial capital of the Middle East, a safe cosmopolitan tax haven where wealthy people from around the world could live and invest. Billions of dollars flowed in. Millions of wealthy residents arrived. The mirage looked absolutely real. But here is the truth about mirages. They are built on an illusion. And once the illusion is shattered, once the conditions that created it disappear, the mirage evaporates. And you can never, ever rebuild a mirage once it has been seen through. That is what this war is doing to the GCC. A few drone strikes on hotels in Dubai, some missile attacks on oil facilities in Saudi Arabia, and suddenly the entire illusion of safety, stability, and invincibility that the GCC spent decades and trillions of dollars constructing is gone. Wealthy people who move to Dubai for safety are looking at each other and asking, is this really safe? Investors who put their money into Gulf real estate and financial markets are asking, is this really stable? The answer that this war is giving them, the answer they're arriving at is no. And once wealthy people and investors arrive at that answer, they leave. And they do not come back. The idea of Dubai as the future New York, as a safe cosmopolitan financial capital that competes with London and Singapore, that idea is gone. The mirage has evaporated. And regardless of how this war ends, regardless of whether a ceasefire is reached tomorrow or in 5 years, the GCC will never fully recover the image and the confidence that this war has destroyed. So let us bring everything together. Southeast Asia is already running out of fuel right now, fuel rationing, grounded flights, workers forced to stay home. China, despite its apparent strength, is the economy least prepared to adapt to a world of expensive energy. Its entire economic model is being destroyed. America, with its vast Western Hemisphere resources, is best positioned to survive and adapt. But its $39 trillion debt and petrodollar dependence are serious risks. Africa faces the most humanitarian danger. Food supply chains breaking down could trigger famine in the world's most vulnerable region. India, with 60% of its energy from the GCC, faces a critical energy challenge at exactly the moment it was ready to step into a larger global economic role. Pakistan, already under severe economic stress, is being hit by energy shortages at the worst possible time. The entire global economic arrangement, where the West consumes and the East produces, is being shattered simultaneously for everyone. And the GCC, the nations that built themselves on the mirage of petrodollar wealth and American military protection, are the biggest economic losers of this war, regardless of how it ends. This war is not just a military conflict, it is the trigger for the most fundamental restructuring of the global economy in generations. The cheap energy world is ending. The global free trade world is fracturing. The American military protection world is fading. And in its place, a new world is emerging. A world where the nations that have their own resources, their own energy, their own food, their own supply chains, those nations survive and thrive. And the nations that depended on cheap imported everything, those nations face a very painful adjustment. The question is not whether this reorientation is coming. It is already here. The question is whether your nation and whether you personally are ready for it. Subscribe for more analysis of this conflict and its global consequences explained in simple English. And tell me in the comments, which country do you think will be the biggest economic winner of this war and which will suffer most? I will see you next time.